Hello, everyone, and welcome to another GoMobi.work coaching conversation, where each week we bring you a workshop with a useful skill or tool for your employees to use and you to use with your employees to help you become a more effective, collaborative, and high-performing team. This week, we have a really exciting topic planned for you, so we're very excited to get into it. My name is Wade Bruffy. I am the co-founder and CEO of GoMobi.work, and as always, I am joined by my co-founder and our chief coaching officer, Mr. Zoltan Sarda.
Hey, everyone. Good to see you all. Looking forward to this conversation. Wade and I talk about this one a lot. It's actually I love this topic because it's really about both developing mindset and engaging in reflective practice, which is key to being an effective coach.
Yes, this topic is very dear to our hearts, and it comes from a question that we get a lot. There are a lot of misconceptions around that. And one of the things that we have to help people with frequently is dealing with the expectation that somebody who is in a mentorship role is actually always going to have the answers. And that is not true. So, I mean, anybody who's been a mentor for long enough and is experienced and skilled in being a mentor, being a coach, helping people get better at what they do, they know that it's not about feeding people the answers. And in fact, feeding people the answers too often can actually be something that hinders their growth. And it makes them not as effective as you'd want to be. And from the manager's perspective, if you're the person leading the team, maybe you've even been frustrated by always feeling like people are coming to you for the answer and not trying to find that answer for themselves. So that's one of the big reasons why we wanted to get into this topic.
Yeah, and I just to add, I mean, I think it's an interesting thing. You know, we hire people and put them in the position of being manager coaches, and then there's like this implicit assumption that they're effective at coaching and that they have the answers. Well, it's, you know, just because you have the title doesn't mean that we have those abilities or that knowledge. And so this is really thinking about how do we move into that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And even sometimes we're going to be talking about dealing with uncertainty today. So we wanted to first set the stage with just a quick refresher on really what the role of a coach is inside a relationship where somebody is coming to somebody else for development, for guidance, for advice, for support, and ultimately to become more effective. So the first thing, and we talk about this a lot with all of our customers, is that coaching needs to happen on a level playing field. So a lot of people aren't totally familiar with this term coaching, but what we're talking about is when somebody's coming to you for support, we really want to adopt the attitude of this is a no judgment zone, and it's you and me working together. We're going to engage in this inquiry-based process, which is what coaching is. We're going to talk a lot about that today. And really that it's a collaborative space. We want to go back and forth with each other and bounce ideas around and figure things out. And in order to make that effective, we need to create an environment that is safe for vulnerability, because without vulnerability, there's no growth. If we feel like we can't make a mistake, we're going to constantly be defensive. We won't learn as much. And ultimately, we're going to be shut off from creativity and trying something bold, which would perhaps be necessary in a super uncertain environment. We're going to be cut off from the creativity if there's a fear of failure, because we're going to feel like we need to do something that is minimizing our personal risk as the person who's going to be ultimately on the line. If this doesn't work out, am I going to get fired? So on and so forth. So we're talking about this in the terms of a coaching space. So of course, there are going to be times when, you know, maybe that conversation is warranted, but inside the bounds of a supportive coaching conversation, something where somebody's trying to develop, we're not having those conversations there. And remember that as a coach, your job is to push for the next aligned action. It's not to solve everything for them. It's to help the person. It's to facilitate a process whereby the person is coming to the next decision that they think is best. And you're influencing that decision, but you're not providing the answer. So that's something that we wanted to just set the stage with. Really, really important part of coaching. And another thing that we talk about frequently is the role of guiding principles in this. And so if your company doesn't have a set of guiding principles already, and we're going to be doing a talk about this in future weeks. So if you don't have some, stay tuned. We'll get you an exercise. You can develop some. But your guiding principles are descriptions of your core values in action. And so what we use those for is it's a template and a framework for approaching uncertain situations. And it's a template for really approaching lots of different situations, probably every situation. Because you're saying that our principles are how we apply it, the way we think about things and the way we handle things. So it's not that these principles always are going to encompass everything. In fact, a great guiding principle is really something that is always being evolved, and it's never done. It's never finalized, because we might learn something through this situation that we need to append onto the guiding principle going forward. So we don't want to treat these as like a static, rigid thing. These are flexible. These are just ways that we're going to prompt ourselves to be engaging in this endeavor, but it's not something that we need to make rigid. And really, the guiding principles are a strategy to inform the questions that we ask. And the questions that we ask aren't things like, what can we do better next time? We talked about this in our previous week, where we talked about single loop learning, which is a question like, what can we do differently next time? Versus a double loop learning question is, what would get in the way of us doing better next time? So the double loop learning question is a little bit is more geared towards understanding and really making an effective change, versus the surface level reflection or trying to just diagnose something. So we're really trying to improve our system of thought with that.
Okay.
Yes. So we have a matrix here, and one of the things that we always talk about when it's coming down to our awareness development and how we address uncertain situations is that it's helpful to know that there are things that we know that we know. There are things that we know that we don't fully understand. And there are things that are our blind spots. So these would be unknown areas. So we put together this matrix, and this was inspired by some research that we found, where we're looking at, this is a descriptions of leaders. So we have their capability and their awareness. So when we have high capability and high awareness, we know that these are our known strengths, and it looks like these should be flopped, but on the awareness side. But what we're looking at here is that we have these known strengths that are also high capability. So we know that we're good at that. And if we advance a little bit here, we can see that this is our zone of high performance, and we're conscious of this high performance. So that's a really powerful zone to be in. Now, if we're in a high capability but a low awareness state, we don't know that we have these strengths. And a lot of the times this is happening when we're trying something for the first time. Maybe we just didn't know that we're good at this thing, and we're trying it and it's new. And we're learning that we're good at it. Or maybe we're rising to an occasion and learning really quick. So we didn't know that we were good at this before, but now we're finding out that we are. Now, in a low capability but a high awareness state, these are our known weaknesses. This is where we just know this isn't our strong suit, and that's okay. That's when we build a team. We know that we have this issue, whether it's as a unit or a part of our product that isn't working as well as we would like it to be, or part of our personal effectiveness that isn't where we want it to be. This is a problem awareness step. And finally, we have our blind spots. And this is the death zone, because if we are getting hit from the blind side all the time, these are things that are going to significantly disrupt us. These are the ones that keep you up all night. These are the ones that really derail things. These are the ones that you should be afraid of, because these are the ones that can really mess you up. And one of them will eventually come along and do that. It's the nature of it being a low awareness and low capability, is that we actually don't know that we don't know it. So that's the interesting part with this, and that's what makes it challenging. But that's why we're talking about this today, is because the best way to resolve these things when they come up is to have a framework that we apply to situations. And so that's why we're talking about what to do, how to coach through when we run into this with our own organization, when you run into it with yours. So that's what we're thinking about here.
Okay, so part of what, thanks for that. I love that piece around like the high awareness, low to high capability. To me, it's like the awareness is the key factor in that, because we're always going to have some low ability and some high ability, but moving into that place. But I think part of the thing here is like to really, when we are faced with a situation where we don't know the answer right away, to think about really going into this inquiry-based exploration. And Wade and I have talked previously about our inquiry-based coaching protocol, and the sort of the idea behind that. It's in some ways it's like having a coach and the person that's being coached engaging in like having solving a jigsaw puzzle. So if you think about that, like the guiding principles are what you're shooting for. We're doing a jigsaw puzzle together. Where you're going. You see the picture on the cover of the box. And then there's some principles. I can focus on the shapes of things. I can focus on the colors. I can focus on patterns. There's different principles on how I do that. And so together, we're going to collaboratively bring our strengths and work on that together. But when we're faced with something that we, as a coach, that we don't know, perhaps my employee, the person I'm supporting, is running a team, and the team is low functioning. The person's doing everything right. Everything that we've talked about, they're really trying, they're really doing everything, but the team has low morale. They're not getting things done on time. There's, sort of conflict in the team. Employee comes to me, I'm working on, I don't know how to solve this. I'm doing everything we've talked about. And now I've got this spot where I don't know either. And so we want to step into sort of a plus version, enhanced version of the inquiry-based coaching protocol. And part of the reason for this, and I talked a little bit earlier about mindset, like why do we want to go into a higher level of this? Because one of the things that happens is that when we're hit with something coming at us that we're uncertain about, it can trigger a lot of different things. One of the things that can trigger it is traditional ways of coaching and learning. So if you think about like all the years you spent in school, almost all the learning that you did, the teacher knew the answer. Like you were working towards figuring out what the teacher, wanted you to know. I always joke, in science and high school, we do experiments, but it's not really experiments because the answer is already known. The teacher knows the answer, or the book knows the answer. But that's a real traditional way. Like the teacher is the authority, got the information, there's an answer that you're going for. It's going to trigger that kind of response. So it's going to trigger you maybe to be a real traditional in your ways of coaching. Sometimes, it's like an affront to our our confidence in our expertise. Like, oh, do I really, that's when your imposter syndrome as a coach strikes up. And so it's going to trigger all kinds of things. Going back to that, we're going to stick with the things we know. I am the authority. I know how to do this. And so let's do this, instead of looking for a different solution, let's try and do this harder, which is not always the best. More and harder is not always better than different. And then it's also going to lead us to confirmation bias. We're going to be having that blind spot. Like, this is what we said we were going to do, so let's just do this. And because that's probably the right thing to do. But that idea of being uncertain is going to trigger these different things. So being deliberate about a process is a helpful way to make sure we're not stepping into those ways of being. So there's this educator named Terry Heck, and he thinks about with students in schools this idea of engaging them in inquiry. That there are some phases to it. And I think it's a really helpful way for us to think about, like, what are the phases of us going through learning and being deliberate about putting those phases into place and knowing what phase you're in, because there's certain, you'll see here, there's certain ways of thinking in each phase. And again, the idea here is to explore possibilities. It's not to center on the thing that I think I know is the best idea, or getting into that, well, I'm going to do this because I've always done it, or this is because I'm the coach and I think it's the thing to do. So in this 4-phase approach to inquiry exploration, The first phase is this concept of interaction or exploration, and we'll talk about these a little bit more. The second one is called clarification phase. The third phase is described as questioning by Terry Heck, and the last one is design. And these things are happening back and forth at the same time. So, when you're in each of the phases, you keep going back and forth to the different ones, and they inform each other. But getting into this idea of what we're looking at, so it's in this interaction and exploration phase, the key here, the goal here, and this is the place where we want to have our open mind, that we're exploring what's available to us without setting on a direction. And I put yet here because you have to center on a direction. You have to come to some solution. You have to come to some plan. But if you do that too early, it's probably not going to be the best solution. So keeping your mind open and the person you're coaching's mind open, so that you're in that dual exploration here together. And so here's some things that you can do in this phase. You go find out what other people do. So again, my example of this, my team is not functioning well. So I'm going to go talk to other people who lead teams, see what they do. I'm going to look at a bunch of media. There's all kinds of information out there on YouTube. There's all kinds of resources available on all aspects of this. Wade and I are often, when we Google things, the thing that comes up is the Harvard Business Review, because it's like they got great, articles in there about different things. Maybe I'm going to go observe somebody, or maybe have somebody observe me doing this work and see what's happening. So, and there's, again, reading all this, basically it's a research mode and really thinking about what's the scope of the field. And the more I think of this as going into a rabbit hole. Actually being in a rabbit hole for a problem where there's not a clear solution is actually a good place to be in the beginning of this exploration. So then the next phase, once we've done that, and again, these are self-informing, they keep going back and forth, but this concept of clarification. So this idea of how do these pieces fit together, or how can I describe what I've learned in my own words? Because you've got all this stuff that you've been looking at, you've been talking to people, and now I'm going to make sense of it in a way that I can use it in my own words. So what are the common things among the things that I'm finding? What are the outliers? What's the information that's not common to all the others? It doesn't fit the pattern, or it seems to be a different way of thinking. And, what is that piece? And then basically, how can I summarize what I've learned? So the more we're sort of able to talk about these things in our own words, the more we own them. The next phase is questioning. So now this is where we're getting down to thinking about what's the answer? What are we going to center on? And one of the big questions here, and this goes back to those guiding principles that Wade was talking about, how does this new information, the new knowledge I've gotten, relate to what I already know and what I can do, and what those guiding principles outline about what is effective practice in our organization? So I'm going to be really comparing those pieces. And in this phase, now we're starting to center, again, dial in on what the solution might be. So asking questions like, what's worth prioritizing? What do we want to focus on? Do I need more information? What information do I need? And what is within my reach? So that a concept of both awareness and capability. What do I think I'm able to do in these next, 3 weeks, given my current level of skill development? And then finally, that last piece of design, this is where, what action am I going to take? What am I going to design? What am I going to do? So here, as we said, okay, I'm going to make a plan. What are those additional resources that I need? What are the OKRs? Wade and I have talked about OKRs before, because that's going to lead to also what's going to be coached here. And then how will I track progress? What's the data? What evidence am I going to, and artifacts am I going to keep track of, so I know that I'm learning here? And so these 4 steps here, I'm going to go back here a little bit. So again, if we are really aware of what phase we're in, and really sort of name it, it really helps us to keep our minds open as we are moving towards solving a problem that is probably a complicated problem. If we don't have the answer to it, it's probably a more complicated problem and really worth spending some of this sort of exploration time in it. So we're going to step now into our little exercise for the week.
I love what you said there, Zoltan, about how important the exploration phase is. And I think just to bring it back for everybody, the vulnerability is so important to that exploration phase, because we talk about this a lot. And there's Zoltan and I were talking about this the other day and actually came up with two separate people that we really respect, two authors that have written about how your first idea is rarely your best one.
Yeah.
And really the author that I was referencing was writing about, you really like, he's saying personally, I don't believe any of the answers that I come up with until answer number 3. Like just the first 2 answers are like, they were just the getting the juices going answers. Third answer is something to pay attention to.
And just to, I think it's also just to sort of give in to that sort of urge to like, I'm the expert here, and so my first answer is like that is, we have to understand that that's actually something that really does happen to us, right? And so I love that idea of write it down and then fold that paper up and put it away until you've thought about some other pieces. I think that's
and then try it. Try them all.
Exactly.
If the first one doesn't, try the next one.
Yeah. So here's the exercise. And part of this exercise, there's a couple of things to this exercise, is that we want you to pay attention, and we'll have the graphic on the next slide here in a minute, but that idea of awareness and capability, like thinking about what your awareness level is around here and what your capability levels are, but then also thinking about this 4-step process of inquiry. And we're going to ask you to think about and deconstruct a time when you really learned something. Wade and I are going to give an example from each of our perspectives. And we encourage you that it not be something about the work that you're doing, like solving whatever problem.
Doesn't have to be. We're encouraging you to think of outside of work if it's
And the reason to think about it is that often with work related things, we think a little bit more in that kind of structured learning environment. Right. And what I'm proposing is that from the time we're like born, we engage in inquiry. That's how we learn, and then we have all kinds of structured formal learning environments that are actually not tied to that very much. And actually, so the best ways to learn, because it's natural, is this inquiry process. So to think about what's your process in that, what did you do to learn the thing you're learning? Who did you talk to? What were the things that you read? What did you watch? How are you putting the pieces together? How did you decide what to focus on for like steps? And then what are those steps? What was the sequence of the steps you took? So I'm going to ask Wade to go ahead and talk about your practice on a very recent learning experience, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a fun one, and it's near and dear to my heart. And this is going to be a business related example. So that's why I'm saying this could be both ways. But recently, in order to develop our product, I learned to use a programming tool called Bubble. And Bubble is a super powerful programming tool. It's the industry benchmark for designing web-based applications. And it's a really fascinating product. And I had not used it before developing some of the software that I've now developed. So this is a recent thing that I learned. And one of the things that my process for this, we were talking just about, what kinds of things did I talk, who did I talk to, what did I read, what did I watch? Well, I think I like a lot of people do, I started on YouTube and I started learning some of the basics, wireframing my first applications, figuring out how different elements could work on the page. And what I quickly realized is that I could really follow along. There's some really great tutorials out there. And I was figuring out how certain pieces fit together. And I was figuring out, I think I'll need more of this particular type of piece because of the things that I'm building. And I took a lot of different approaches based on that. But what I quickly realized is that I actually need additional help. So I went and took a course on it. And that was almost 6 months and very intensive, where I learned a lot of that stuff. And so to go out and actually seek training on something was super powerful. But really the exploration even started with, is this the right thing to do? What are the capabilities of this thing? Do I think this could work? When I initially decided, yes, I think this is the right tool, then it was even a matter of, well, am I the right person to do it? Do I feel like this is something that I want to learn, or should I hire somebody to do this for me? And what I ultimately decided is that I want to learn this, and I can learn this. So I started to do those first steps. So moving from then into questioning of like, okay, well, what is that going to take? And then finally into design. And so in design, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to put a lot more structure around this. I'm going to get somebody who's an expert to train me, and then we'll see where I'm going with that. And as part of that process, I was developing the whole time. So that was a really interesting process. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I love how you talked about both. You were, seemed like you were high on your awareness scale of kind of knowing what you didn't know. But
That's
then
right.
also moving from that you knew that you didn't know things, and you were starting to move over to the right there on that capability scale.
That's exactly right. And to also say that when consulting with the experts, I realized that there were a ton of things that I had no idea that I was going to need, that I also didn't know. So if I had continued to try to go it alone and not bring on a coach, I'm a firm believer that any coach that tells you that you need coaching that doesn't have a coach themselves, this is a red flag. So if I had not had that person, my coach, saying to me, oh, you're going to need that, and I'm like, well, I don't even know what that is. This is totally new to me. So in this instance, this person does have all the, a lot of the answers, but that process was also, what I was giving them is a unique thing. They don't know necessarily how I'm going to approach something. So it's them figuring out helping me figure out along the way what's going to be needed. So they're guiding me, and that's how that was working. So I think that's another example of what we're talking about today, is that dealing with unique situations, and just being able to guide somebody through a process using your existing knowledge, but also recognizing that there's going to be things that we learn in that process as well.
Yeah. And my example is also a recent one. It's actually working with you, Wade.
Yeah.
So I've been a woodworker pretty much my whole life, and building things. And Wade, at his house, he has this very large deck. It's 2 stories high. It's way up off the ground, and there are some rotten beams in there. So we decided to work on this together. It was like kind of interesting because there were these major support posts on it that were termite ridden and pretty rotten. Like, you could just with your fingers take these beams apart.
Yeah.
And so, from my known my abilities, I know that part of making a structure, part of joining wood together, we didn't want to replace it because we had a lot of good wood in there too, but is making a particular kinds of joints. So I have lots of experience with that. But with this particular area, Wade and I didn't, we didn't want to have it look clunky, because the support beams are also part of the appearance of the thing. And so I knew we wanted to make some kind of joint. I knew we wanted to use epoxy to join things together. And so what I did, I started exploring and actually asking people, some friends of mine who have boats, about, and there were some conversations about how these traditional old wooden boats had to build or recreate their masts by either extending them or rebuilding them. And they use these particular kinds of joints that they could use a lot of the portion of the mast, but then splice in another piece. It's like, okay, so that's the technique. That's the kind of technique we want to use. So now how can we apply that? So it was really around sort of knowing some areas of strength that I already had, really just starting to play around with the idea and asking people, then getting to that point of, okay, so I'm going to clarify this by saying, so here's how they did it with a mast, and here's how we can apply that to this particular beam that we're working on. And then coming up with, here's the plan. And I actually went in the design and the plan. I sketched it up in Illustrator, so I had exact angles and all that stuff. And so that's that process, but it's that going with from what you know are your strengths and what you know you're missing, basically, but starting in that playful area, being open to possibilities, being, I wouldn't have thought much previously. It just sort of happened that this conversation about masks came up right when we were talking about how to rebuild this deck. So that's that process of moving from that sort of informal place and exploration to, okay, so here's what I'm going to do tomorrow.
Love it. Yes, great example, and it turned out great, if anybody is wondering.
Yeah.
We're proud of it.
It didn't fall down. So
It did not fall down. That's true. And it looks way better than before. So that's great. Thanks again for your help, Zoltan. So we wanted to conclude this, and hopefully that this is really helpful for you. We wanted to send you off, and if you need to go back to any point in this video, rewatch the section and pause it and take notes and figure out, really apply this to something that you have done recently, because I think you'll find that it's really something that you may have been doing somewhat unconsciously, but to bring this into a conscious sense and bring it into our work is so powerful, and there you can achieve so much. So we're also going to be announcing a collaboration with another partner of ours, another really accomplished coach, where we're going to be talking about this in a lot more detail. But what we wanted to leave you with today is that just the role of the coach again. We can't emphasize this enough. As a coach, it is our responsibility to create a level playing field for the person that is participating in this process with us. We cannot hold ourselves above them. We need to be their teammate in this process. And even if even if you technically are managing this person and you outrank them, whatever it is, those structures do exist, and they exist out of necessity. We need to suspend some of the ways that we show up in those situations to make this situation as effective as it can be. And the reason for that is vulnerability. We need vulnerability to access creativity, because we need to be in a space where it's okay for us to make a mistake. We need to be in a space where we're not perfect, and it's hard to admit that sometimes in a work context where we're always trying to be perfect. In a lot of those situations, is reduce the number of errors to as few as possible, which is natural. I think we want to everybody's concerned with high performance. That's what we're all about. That's why we're having this conversation. Sometimes that can be a limiting factor. So then really your job is to push for the next aligned action. Your job, once you've created that space, you're just helping somebody to make that decision. You're helping that person to drive themselves. We're not solving the problems for them. We're going to facilitate their process of figuring it out. So,
all right.
Thanks, everyone.
We hope this was helpful. As always, again, it's one of our favorite topics, because it's really about not only techniques, but it's like what's the reflection that good coaches go through to sort of really think about what's going on for them internally. Yes,
100%. So thank you all for being here. Check this out. Check out our other videos on our YouTube channel. You'll be fine. If you're seeing this after the fact, then you'll be right on there already. So check some of those out. There's a lot of stuff that we referred to from previous ones. And we will see you next week for another coaching conversation with GoMobi.work.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Be well.
Thanks, everyone.